Oh, my little baby. Okay. Libby Lee, this is a video for you that we're making for you to watch while Mommy and Daddy are in Cuba. Okay? And you're right here, but you're also watching the video right now. Isn't that funny? I'm talking to you, not you. You, not you. So, this is, we're going to read some stories for you. And so that you can, if you miss us, we love you very much. And we'll be home soon, okay? This is called The Graves Family. So, no one saw them slide.
Not me, not you, not me.
Talking to this Libby Lee, okay? No one saw them slide into Union City that dark and dreary night. Doug and Shiloh Graves arrived with their family of 5 children to take up residence in the old house on Park Street. The town clock struck wildly and ran backwards, and the water in the fountain in the village square turned crimson as their car drove by. The first thing the new family did was to paint the house blood red. No one in the village even considered visiting them after that. Even the postman left their mail on the curb. But one day, Seth and Sarah Miller, the children right across the street, decided to go over to the Graves house and make friends. They walked right up to the front door. When they reached to grasp a rather hideous-looking door knocker, it grinned and writhed out of their hands, then knocked all by itself. Just as they were about to run home, the front door opened. There stood a boy about their age. We're your neighbors from across the street? Seth began. Can you come out and play? Asked Sarah. The boy looked startled. You want to play with me? That was a weird reply, thought Sarah. Well, sure, you're our new neighbor, aren't you? What's your name? He hesitated. Hieronymus, the strange boy said. Hieronymus, Sarah said. Well, I'm going to call you Ronnie. You know, Hieronymus. The boy loved his new nickname, and the 3 neighbors had wonderful adventures together. They climbed the dirt mountain up by the cemetery, fed Mrs. Tyson's goats, and built twig boats for the St. Joseph's River. The 3 were together from morning until night and became best friends. But while Ronnie had been in the Miller kitchen many times, Seth and Sarah had never been invited into any part of Ronnie's house. Whenever they suggested going to his house, he would make some sort of excuse and change the subject. Finally, though, the day came when Ronnie asked Sarah and Seth over to play. His parents weren't home, and he was babysitting his 4 little sisters. He could use the company, he said. The Graves seemed to be nice enough people, a little strange perhaps, but nice enough, Mrs. Miller said when Seth and Sarah asked if it was okay. And so on that day, Seth and Sarah went. Come in, said a voice when they knocked, but when they entered, a dark cloud of flying things whirled around their heads, then darted upstairs. Huge plants and musty flowers were everywhere, but all dead. 2 robed skeletons leered at them from 2 near chairs piled with huge fluffy pillows, and the walls seemed to be painted a strange dull black. As their eyes adjusted to the dark, they realized the walls were alive with spiders. Sarah gasped when suddenly Ronnie appeared in front of them. They're perfectly harmless, he assured them. My father's not only an inventor and scientist, but an amateur entomologist. He collects endangered bugs and spiders from all over the world. He feels that by giving them the run of the house, they're happier. See? I'm showing her, not you. I was just fixing lunch for my sisters. Come and meet them.
That's the same girl.
Oh yeah? That's what you'll say. You'll say that when you watch this. Maybe you'll say what you see then. Blah, 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 blah. Sarah and Seth walked more slowly now. The kitchen was filled with pots and pans hanging from the ceiling, surrounding the stove. My mother is a gourmet cook, Ronnie said, sitting down at the table beside 4 little red-headed girls, all the same age. And these are Millicent, Scintilla, Congolia, and Tondilio.
1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, I already counted.
Now you count it again. They were all eating peanut butter sandwiches, but behind them was a strange-looking plant with leaves like tentacles. I've never seen anything like this, Sarah said as she moved in closer. When suddenly the plant lunged at her. Her name is Phoebe, a rare and unknown Venus flytrap. Just a baby. She thinks you're going to feed her, Ronnie said as he popped a piece of sandwich into one of Phoebe's gaping mouths. My mother raised her from a single cutting. My father brought her back from the wilds of Peru. Sarah watched as Phoebe snatched a giant fly in mid-flight. She gulped. My mother isn't exactly great with regular plants and flowers, but she has a veritable green thumb when it comes to Venus flytraps. Ronnie said, my father is the genius, though. Would you like to see his laboratory? Would you? Would you? Would you? Would you? Would you? They followed Ronnie into the basement. Everywhere they looked were bubbling beakers, hissing gauges, flashing lights, and buzzing buttons, with curling glass tubes running from one another. Ronnie placed a small beaker of green liquid in front of them, then placed a peach next to it. Here's his biggest experiment ever. It's top secret. If I show you, you can't tell anyone about it. Swear on a dead toad? Do you? Do you swear on a dead toad? Do you? Yes, Sarah and Seth agreed. Ronnie took a small dropper and dripped 3 drops of the liquid onto the peach. It just sat there for a while, then the peach seemed to puff up, and before their eyes, globs of peach fuzz started growing longer and longer and longer until they became bushy black hair.
See the bushy black hair?
House cats. What? Oh, man. Man, oh, man. If this stuff can grow hair on a peach, think what it could do for all the old bald geezers in this town. Seth crowed. How did he discover this stuff? House cats. He noticed that how much they shed, their fur grows back twofold, only to shed again. So he figured out how to have house cats. So he figured out how the secret of how house cats grow back their fur, said Sarah. Yes, he extracted an enzyme from the follicles of their hair. He won't even tell us what. Oh dear, does it hurt the cats? Ronnie laughed. Not a bit. He held up a bottle and gazed at it. My father is still perfecting it, though. What he knows right now for sure is that this formula causes hair to grow on anything. Just then, 2 voices called from upstairs. Children, we're home. Oh, look at that. I love her.
Who?
Her. They all ran downstairs. Darlings, Mrs. Graves said as she hugged Ronnie and his sisters. And this must be Seth and Sarah. Greetings, greetings, Dr. Graves said cheerfully, and went right to the basement door. I must away to the laboratory. Your father and I shopped all day to find exactly the right type of blistered variegated turnip. I'm just dying to try a new recipe that I thought up today, she said as she floated into the house. Just then, all the fluffy pillows jumped off the chairs and trotted into the kitchen after her. Seth and Sarah gasped. The fluffy pillows were the hairiest, most repulsive, biggest spiders they had ever seen.
The tarantulas.
They're even bigger than that. Come along, my dearest pookie wookie doodles, Mrs. Graves cooed as the spiders jumped around her doing tricks. And perhaps you children would like to come for dinner tonight. Seth and Sarah gulped. Please come, Ronnie said excitedly. Well, we'll ask, said Sarah. Be back at 6, Mrs. Graves said as she changed the pots and pans and put on a chef's cap, playing the pots and pans. See? Yeah. When Seth and Sarah told their mother about the Graves house and about the spiders on the walls and the Venus flytrap, she just winked at them as if they were pulling her leg. Then when they told her about how Mrs. Graves was a gardener and a cook and a little odd, she only heard gardener and cook. So when they said Mrs. Graves had asked them to dinner, Mrs. Miller said, "How nice! Of course you can go to dinner. And I'm going to invite her to the Garden Club tea. And she cut some flowers from her garden to give Seth to give to Mrs. Graves." Just as the children walked in the front door, a loud explosion rocked the house. Plaster fell from the ceiling. Spiders ran in panic. A puff of acrid-smelling fumes wafted up from through the floor registers. "Lovey, I think I've gotten the formula very nearly right this time," Dr. Graves sang as he bounded up the basement stairs. "Just in time for dinner, dear," Mrs. Graves announced as she gestured for everyone to join her in the dining room. "These are for you," Seth said as he handed her the bouquet his mother had sent. But as she took them, every flower turned brown, dried out, and instantly withered. "Thank you, Mrs. Graves," said as she put the flowers in a vase. And she placed them on the table as if nothing had happened to them. But look what happened to him. Everyone gathered around the table. Dr. Graves rubbed his hands together enthusiastically. "Tonight's menu is," Mrs. Graves uncovered each serving dish, "Great New Zealand land vipers with capers and clotted cream. Pureed lampfish fins with bee's knees and guppy fillets. Parasitic lamprey spines with spotted eel and tamarillo aspic from Madagascar. Boiled blistered variegated turnip root from right here. And Indonesian snarling knishes au gratin, garnished with octopus knuckles from Tibet."
How do you think that looks?
Well, you know, it's...
Oh! Why do you keep doing that?
I'm showing you.
Not me.
You are. I'm showing you. I'm showing you. Then, that's when Seth and Sarah noticed Phoebe. She had grown even bigger since that afternoon. And beetle leg jello with fly carcass for Phoebe, Mrs. Graves said, as the giant flytrap flailed its arms and devoured its dinner, plates and all. Everyone sat eating their supper with relish and glee. All but Seth and Sarah. They just sat and stared at their plates. Their food was moving. Whoa. "Oh, dear me," Mrs. Graves said as her eyes filled with tears. "You don't like it. Poor Hieronymus. Just when you finally made some friends, I've spoiled everything." "Oh, Mrs. Graves, please don't cry," Sarah begged. "It's just that this food is a little unusual for us. That's all." The food was still moving. "We've moved from town to town, always at night, always hoping to make a fresh start," Dr. Graves said sadly. "But something always seems to happen." "You're different," Seth said, "but we like that you're different. My mother even sent along this invitation for the Garden Club tea." Mrs. Graves eagerly opened it, and her eyes widened, and she shrieked with joy. "The Union City Ladies Auxiliary Garden Club cordially invites you to attend a tea on Saturday at the home of Mrs. Appassionata Trenchmouth. She sang out as she danced around the room. "Bring a plant to share. Oh, my dears, maybe at long last we'll fit in." After all, Sarah thought, what could happen at the Union City Ladies Garden Club tea? On Saturday, Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Graves arrived for the tea on time. Mrs. Graves had put on her best outfit for the occasion, brought along one of Phoebe's babies in a covered carrier. Oh boy. It's like boink, boink, boink. Her heart was full of happiness. She and Mrs. Miller had 2 cups of tea and had heard about Mrs. Saspilla's black-eyed Susans, Miss Delilah's giant delphiniums, Mary Pigeon Pie's double petunias, when Doretta Dove Tonsil trotted through the front door out of breath. "Guess who's coming to judge the fall home show this year?"